So, first, thank you for doing this. I don't know if you were aware of the Walker's Cay Chronicles fan page on Facebook or not, but started out with a couple of guys that designed the page, and I think there were 25 of us on this fan page for a while. And this past Sunday, which would have been yesterday, we surpassed 5,000 fans for
Gee.
for the show. For a Facebook page that, like I said, was just started by a couple of guys here out of Florida, in surrounding states. None of them is not what they do full time or anything, so it was just kind of a fun thing to bring some people together.
Quite amazing that there were that many people, 5,000 people, who still remember, that are old enough to still remember the Walker's Cay Chronicles.
Well, and the funny part is their ages from teenagers up to in their 70s, maybe even early 80s.
Hysterical.
So, I mean, it's we've talked before, the show ran for 16 years, but ended in...
Gosh, we'll have to back into it. It started in 92.
So 2008,
Yeah,
it ended.
2008 it ended.
And here we are 12 years later, and there's still
Amazing.
a lot of people that not only remember the show, but want the show to come back. Whether you realize it or not, it is kind of, I won't even say the gold standard, it's the platinum standard that all the other shows are held to. With all the advancements in video, computers, lighting, different types of cameras compared to what y'all had back then, there's still not a show that has been produced recently as far back as most of these people can remember that compares. So,
A lot of reasons why, but
well, and some of that's what we're going to get into, I hope.
good.
So, we said when we hit 5,000 fans that we were going to ask some of those people to send some questions in that they wanted to know, keeping it related to the show, but a little bit of room for them to ask some personal questions too. So we did limit the questions we got in because we just didn't want to sit here and have this running for 8 hours. So we came up with what we thought were some really good questions. And question number one, the first question we got was, people are curious about where they can either purchase the show still or where they can find it. Whether it's full seasons or, all the shows or something like that. So
I'm going to answer that question. I am drinking a little bit of rum to sort of smooth the skids a little bit, but it's that time of day. I mean, the sun is past the yard arm, so I think it's okay.
most
You sadly cannot buy the episodes any longer. ESPN owns them. I've tried for many, many years to buy them, rent them, partner with them to rebroadcast them. I think I've tried absolutely every single possible scenario to resurrect those tapes. They have no interest or liability concerns regarding releases from all the people that were featured over the years, and heaven knows why they're intractable about making any sort of a deal on those programs. So I digitized them this past year, and I'm slowly oozing them onto my personal YouTube channel. So although they can't be purchased anywhere, they can be seen there. There'll be a slow addition to the roster, but they'll all wind up being there. I think at this point there are around 20. I know that at Hells Bay Wayside, the website, there are a good number, but eventually I'll have them all.
Okay.
And the quality is poor and doesn't reflect the fact that they were actually filmed on film. And we've lost that because we can't get access to the beta masters. But they'll all be there. All the people will be there. All the adventures will be there. It's just going to take a little time. I don't want to throw them all up there at once.
Right. Maybe that's the new march we need to do on ESPN.
You know what, it's amazing. They've been contacted at every conceivable level with every conceivable scenario, and they just
Won't do it.
dismiss it. Or won't respond. It's been very difficult to do it. Impossible.
Well, that stinks.
Well, we'll do it another way.
Yeah, you're, and I can see we're going to the digital could be a little difficult. I know it's time consuming because I've done it myself with some you gave to me at one point in time. So it's a little time consuming doing it that way. And you're right, you do lose some of that, some of the feel, some of the nostalgic feel to the show. So let's see if we can get to something a little more positive.
Sorry.
No. You've always, I kind of, being a longtime friend, I kind of know your life story, how you got into it and everything. But how did Walker's Cay Chronicles come about?
It's a hugely long story. I'll try to condense it as best I can. My wife Diane was a flight attendant in those years. This was would have been the early 90s. Flight attendant for Pan Am, and she flew all over the world, and she flew with Stu Apt a bunch, actually. He was a pilot for Pan Am, and she was on a trip to somewhere in South America. She was working first class. A young man who gets on the plane with a fly rod. He's on his way to the mountains of Chile, Argentina, I don't know, but fly fishing for trout. Patagonia, perhaps. And so she sees a young man with a fly rod sitting in first class where she's working, and so she chats him up, and oh yes, he's on his way to fly fish in Patagonia, and he's from New York, and somewhere along the line, one of the stops, they develop a problem with the airplane, and they have to stay overnight, or over several nights somewhere, until they get another plane. So Diane invites this young man to have supper with the crew. And he does, and they talk, and it's all very friendly, and then he goes on to his fishing destination, and Diane returns to Florida, goes out on another flight the next week, and on her way back from South America, who's on the plane again but this young man with the fly rod. To make a long, long story short, she tells him along the way at some point that her husband is a fishing guide and guides people for bonefish and tarpon and snook and redfish and bass and, the whole thing. And he goes, that's nice. And she gives him one of my cards. He goes on his way. Diane comes home, tells me about the deal. Very interesting. This guy is sitting around on a Saturday morning sometime, and I used to do some filming with the ABC American Sportsman. He's looking at one of those shows, and I'm on the show, and he sees that I'm on there, and he recognizes the name, and he calls me up, and it turns out that his dad invented and holds all the licenses and patents around the world for the aerosol spray valve. And he owns this island in the Bahamas where there's a hotel and a dock, and they want to know if there is sufficient bone fishing in the area for them to invest in some skiffs and some guides, and they'll have a bone fishing destination there. And would I fly over there, look at the flats, check it out? So they hired me to do that. I go over there, they fly me around, I see there's all kind of flats around there. Then we get in the boat and go, and there's bonefish everywhere, mutton snapper tailing on the flats, permit. I mean, it was really big kudu sharks. I mean, there's the whole deal. So they then hired me to supervise the building of 6 skiffs, which I did. And then we took them over to Walker's on a freighter. And then I found 6 U.S. guides who were willing to bring their customers over to stay in the hotel, even the restaurant. But these 6 U.S. guides who were friends of mine, and were guides in the Keys in South Florida, they would bring their customers over, and they would have access to the boats and all that fantastic virginal fishing that was down along those islands to the south of Walker's Cay. And it was sensational. I was one of the guides. I mean, it was sensational. They were top of the line, 16-foot dolphin super stiffs, built super light. Trying to remember what motors we put. 50 horsepower. I think they were Mercury's on their tillers. And they were cool, light little boats, good ride. And so at that time, the only other fishing show that was dealing with salt water, the only other one, was a show that was being done by Mark Sosa. He was just getting started with that show. And I had worked with the American Sportsman and the Outdoor Life series, and their format was celebrities. They always had a celebrity of some sort, from the film industry, from professional sports, from somewhere, a celebrity, to fish with someone or hunt with someone who was really proficient. But the guests almost never really were. And so it was sort of a babysitting, awkward, you did get to see the film stars and so forth and the athletes, but they were out of their realm. They were in much deeper water than they could keep their heads above. And so it always aggravated me, and I always thought, gosh, how great it would be to have a fishing show that featured real fishermen. Real fishermen. Not only real fishermen, but fishermen who had a history and a relationship. Because all of us who hunt or fish have those relationships with other people that we hunt and fish with. And those relationships are a tremendous part of why we're there in the first place. perhaps the biggest book. And none of that was ever featured in any of these shows. And so I had worked with all these really, really talented people from ABC and from the Outdoor Life series, fantastic editors and cinematographers and sound recorders. They were really as good as anybody in the business. They were all involved in filming serious documentaries in addition to these outdoor shows. So I thought, what if we could bring some of those people together, get a financial partner, and put together a series that featured all these things that were missing in outdoor television at the time. So we went to Bob Aplanel, who was the father of this young man that my wife had met in Chile or wherever, and we approached him with the concept of Walker's Cay being the lyrical jumping off point for every episode that we did. We might be going to Midway Island, but we left from Walker's lyrically. And the idea was, I mean, he certainly had the finances to launch the project, but it was an opportunity to bring a lot of attention to the island, which was doing satisfactorily for him, but it could have done much better financially. It just, nobody knew it was there. It was paradise, but no one knew it was there. And so here was an opportunity through a fishing show to bring a lot of attention to the island in return for his sponsorship of the show. And he thought it was a great idea. And he said, all right, let's do it. And so we went and looked for some other sponsors to sort of lighten the load for him. He put together a production company that consisted of a lot of the players from the old ABC American Sportsman team and the Outdoor Life team, and myself as the host. And it was really my wife who opened the door to the Walker's Cay Chronicles, and was featured therein many, many times in the course of the 16 years. But we were among the very, very first of the serious outdoor fishing shows to come along. There had been a couple really, really great ones. Jerry McGinnis had a great fishing show. It wasn't so much saltwater, but it was a great fishing show. And Jerry McGinnis was a brilliant producer of outdoor television. Brilliant. Dave Winkleman had a show. Again, not a saltwater show. So there were a couple. Roland had a show. Roland Martin had a show. Bill Dance had a show, but there was no saltwater. And the reason probably was that within the fishing genre, all the money was on the bass side. There really wasn't much sponsorship money available on the saltwater side. I just kicked this thing. I don't know if I'm still there. Sorry about that.
So, really, it was kind of a.
Sorry for the long answer.
No. I mean, it goes to show really how it was almost meant to be. I mean, when you think about the odds of this person being on that particular plane with your wife, who happens to, contrary to what she may say, happens to be one hell of a fly angler, and you know, she recognizes it and takes time to talk, and hey, it's kind of,
Serendipitous.
yes, there's a perfect word for it. Now, we talk a lot when we teach classes or when we've done our shows that I've been blessed enough to do with you, the filming and stuff, about the relationship, and you just mentioned it in that answer. The relationship between the angler and the guide, or two anglers, or we have often said there's a relationship that forms between two anglers, or the angler and a guide, that doesn't really form anywhere else. And they are special. I mean, I've got some clients that I have been fortunate enough to have been guiding for 15 plus years now. And, you know, they develop from a client to a very close personal friendship that you may only see them 3 or 4 days out of the year, but you look forward to it like it's your best friend coming in for a visit type deal. In all of your shows, you had some very good relationships, but one that takes a lot of people and focuses what they feel is a special relationship was the shows you did with Jose Wahebe. From the early shows with his Magnum PI shorts, you know, up to when you did, I guess, guest appearances on his show. How did that relationship come about?
Incidentally, Magnum got those shorts from Jose. For the record, Jose, when I first met him, was probably 13 years old. He was on fire with fishing. Somehow he had gotten Lefty Cray's phone number, and he called Lefty every day. And Lefty, being Lefty, took his calls and responded to Jose as Lefty responded to everyone. And Lefty was not put off in any way that a 13-year-old kid called him constantly. But he needed a break every once in a while, and so he gave Jose my number. And so Jose began calling Lefty and I alternatively. And he always had really, really good questions about fishing. I mean, he didn't call for a BS session. Jose had questions. Jose wanted to know how this worked, or how that worked, or which knot, or, you know, how far, or how near, whatever, how deep. He got a little older and he got a job as the snapper boy at the Miami Seaquarium. Fed the snappers in the fish tanks at the Seaquarium, and still called every couple of days. And fished constantly. And finally he got to an age and a level of interest where he wanted to become a guide. In those days, I worked in a commercial bank as a lender. And Jose needed a boat, he needed a truck, and he needed a credit card. And he had no credit, and I think he was 18 years old. I mean, he had no chance of getting any of those things. He had no resources. And at that point, you know, I had known Jose for 5 years. I mean, he was an amazing kid. And I could see the potential that Jose offered as a guide. Anyway, I lent him the money to buy a skiff and a truck, and I gave him, we were in a bank, and it was just starting the Master Charge program. So I gave Jose a Master Charge card with a limit of about $600. Back then, lenders and commercial banks had a lot more latitude than they have today. That could never happen today. But I felt I knew Jose. I felt like we were safe. I knew the boat, I knew the truck, I knew, we were safe. Jose was never a day late, never missed a paint. Jose was Jose. And so that led to, as I started a fishing program before Walker's Cay Chronicles called the Saltwater Angler. And it ran for 2 years, and Jose was a very, very frequent guest on that show. And then later, as the Chronicles launched, Jose was a frequent guest on that show. And then Jose decided that he wanted his own show. And he asked me if I would produce his pilot for his show, which I did. Not by myself. I had the help of the same people who led me all those years through the process of Walker's. Because when we started Walker's, I had no skills, none. So everything I learned from 3 or 4 guys who were monsters in the field, and they made it easy for me to learn. They were very helpful, and I felt inclined to help Jose, just as I had been helped. And it turned out that Jose had something that none of us had. Jose had, the quirky little smile, and Jose didn't really have the accent, but he had some sort of inflection that spoke of Latino, but what Jose had that nobody had was Jose had this incredible ability to peer right straight into the camera and look into the camera as though he was looking in your eyes. And he would look into the camera and he would go, "Come here, I want to show you this glass of rum. Look at the color of this rum. Come in here a little closer. Really look at this rum." All of a sudden, you were Jose's buddy, and you were sharing a glass of rum with Jose, and Jose wasn't even trying. That was Jose. And you don't develop that. You don't learn that. You have it or you don't have it. Jose had tons of it. And he was an incredibly smart businessman. He figured out how to put it all together and make the sponsorships work. And Jose was a class act in every single way. And I never felt like a mentor to Jose. I felt like Jose's friend, and we fished together, we laughed together, we talked about life together. Interestingly, Jose and his fiance were here for supper a week before he died. And Diane, who has an aversion to private airplanes, small airplanes, said to Jose, "Jose, please be careful in that small. I worry about you in that plane." And Jose went, "Diane, you have no idea how much I love that plane, because I built that plane myself. I go out in the evenings and I sit in the cockpit and I dream of the places that this airplane's going to take me. And I look at the controls and I touch everything, because I sit for hours looking at that plane. And every time I leave the ground in that airplane, it's like the same as pushing away from the top." And He said, if I should ever die in that airplane, it would just be where I should perish. And he said, what you really ought to worry about is Flip on that motorcycle. And a week later, he was...
And Jose, I only got to meet him one time at ICAST. And he was busy with a lot of other people, but he still took a couple of moments to say hi and chit-chat. He's one of those guys I always wanted to fish with, and unfortunately never got the opportunity. And I don't know, his show, besides your show, those were the two most realistic fishing shows out there. He took a little different point, you know, where he had his, we call it Spanish fly tackle box or Spanish fly tips. He always did a little tip or showed something at the end that he was using.
Yeah, Vida del Mar or something like that.
Yes.
I forget what it was.
But, you know, that was his teaching angle at the end of every show.
He was a great teacher.
But neither one of you ever took a fishing show and made it this overproductive, loud, obnoxious, hooting, hollering, screaming fiasco that so many of these others have tried over the years. So different approach, and to me, what I would consider more realistic. I mean, we catch fish on a boat, we celebrate. We do. I mean, every fish we get, we do a little celebration, but it's not loud enough for the next 5 counties to hear us.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, that celebration could be a wink.
Could be
you could produce a flask out of your plunder and have a dram of good rum to celebrate a fine catch, but you don't have to yell and scream and high five and go crazy over a redfish.
Well, and I've told you before, I grew up in the bass fishing realm. My grandfather was the originator of Strike King lures, making them in his garage back in the 40s and 50s, I believe it was. I'd have to look at the articles again to get the exact date, but I grew up around Bill Dance, Bill Norman, in a lot of those shows. And you know, they were taking 3, 4, 5 days to produce a 30-minute show that was all action. Very rarely did you have a time frame where they weren't reeling a fish in or, you know, it pitching to a fish, something. There was always action. And I remember growing up as a kid thinking, man, my bass fishing trips are never like that. You know, so either I'm not going to the right spots or, you know, I'm not holding my jaw right.
You were going to the right spots, you just weren't going to their spots.
And, well, and then my grandfather pulled me aside, you know, and he's like, listen, when we do this, it's 5 fishing days crammed into 30 minutes, so all you have is action, so. But your shows were never forced like that. That it came across anyway. I mean, I know we've shot some shows and it can take a while to shoot a show, but I can remember shows where fishing may not have been what some people considered phenomenal or even good. But you produced a show around what really transpires and what's really important, which is not necessarily the fish, but it's everything that goes into catching and tricking that fish, if that makes sense.
Sure it does. The gift is not the fish. And if you don't know what the gift is, you should play golf.
I think it was, yeah, I'm not even going to try to venture the name of the author because I can't remember who it was. But their thing was there's 3 stages in a fisherman's life, so to say. The first stage, they want to catch the most fish. It's all about a numbers game. Then the second stage, when they develop a little bit, it's all about catching the biggest fish. That's all that matters. And then the third stage, when they finally get developed, it has nothing to do with any of that. Just the journey and the trip just going out.
That was Pee Wee Herman.
So, I know you're involved with Hell's Bay Boat Works, always have been, since the earliest forms I know of it. What got you into that venture?
I've always built skiffs. I've been involved in a number of skiff companies before Hell's Bay, but and I've always had skiffs since I was 13 or 14 years old. I've had skiffs, and I've had a place to use them where there were lots of fish. So I learned early on what a skiff was, what a skiff needed to be, and over the course of my formative years, I had the opportunity to build a bunch, be involved in different companies and so forth, and I guided in the Keys for many years, and it began to get crowded. Sadly, I mean, it really began to get crowded. To the point where every day that you went out, it wasn't, well, the fish should be here, the tide is such, the wind is such, the light is such, I should be there. Instead, it became a situation where it was almost a chess match. I know I should be there, but I know Fred is going to be there. I saw him leave the dock at 2 p.m. I know that he's going there, so maybe I should go over here, or maybe. And it wasn't about the fish and the conditions and the signs of the natural world that brought you to your fishing plan. I mean, all of us, guides, anglers that aren't guides, we all formulate a plan for the day. It may not be a formal plan. It could be a very liquid plan. It could ebb and flow and change several times during the day, but you have a plan. You have a reason that you go to point A and another reason that you go to point B, and stay there and wait for this or don't stay. And it just got to be that the number of people on the flats in South Florida and the Keys got to the point where it was unbearable. So I just started going deeper and deeper and deeper into the Everglades, just to get away from all that. I didn't care that it was tarpon season. If you booked me, we were going fishing. We might find tarpon, but from February to July, I was not letting my life revolve around tarpon and getting caught up in this endless revolving chairs sort of tarpon fishing. So I needed a different boat. I needed a boat that was shallow draft, and I needed a boat that was quiet. And I needed a boat that was light and that would get me into these backcountry places that the typical tarpon skiffs of the time would not do. And there wasn't anything. And so myself and half a dozen other guys started using John boats. And not just any John boat. We found a certain John boat that was strong enough, that had the right length, the right width, the right draft, that would get us into these very, very remote places. And the magic formula seemed to be 16-foot length and a 48-inch width at the chine. And that combination of lightweight material like aluminum gave you a draft of about, I don't know, 3 or 4 inches, which would pretty much get you anywhere. The problem with the John boat, and believe me, I fished it for years, caught insane fish out of the John boat, including giant tarpon, jewfish, and I mean, everything that you can imagine. But pride, when you got into a chop, it was tough. The other thing was there was not a terribly quiet machine for sneaking up on fish. And so a friend of mine at the time, Al Chittum, wondered if we couldn't make a John boat out of fiberglass and change the shape of it in some way so that we could retain the shallow draft and the narrow width that gave us good poling ability, good tracking ability, but somehow force the entry of the boat into a V so that when you got into a head sea, that entry could cleave the head sea and give you a decent ride. And so we both knew a young man from the Key, who lived down in the Keys and was building boats, and he was brilliant at materials. He was brilliant at all the formulas that give you draft. In other words, he could go, okay, you want a 3.5-inch draft, the boat has to be this long, this wide, this shape, and it has to weigh 300 pounds. And you'll have a 3.5, 4-inch draft. And it was all numbers. It wasn't, gee, I wonder if we could, no. Chris Moorjohn, he could figure it out. He knew the formulas, and he was very familiar with the newest materials at the time and understood the value of building a lightweight boat. And so the three of us got together, along with Al Chittum's wife, who was a very talented bookkeeper, and we started a company. And we called it Hells Bay Boat Works. Not Hells Bay Boat Company, but Hells Bay Boat Works, because we wanted it to be a boat works. We wanted to be able to take other boats and fix them and improve them, and we wanted to be able to do experiments, and we wanted to be able to do custom work for people, and we didn't want it to be a boat company where you go in, put down your check, and walk away with a boat that came out of a toothpaste tube. We wanted it to be a real boat works. I mean, today now everything is a boat works. They have no idea what it even means.
Right.
But it's a boat works. We were a boat works. People brought us boats and we transformed them. And we built a real technical poling skiff that got you into the part of the game where none of the other boats would get you. They had better rides. They might have been drier. Certainly they were faster. But nothing fished like our boats did. Nobody even dreamed. And then it didn't take long before you were a tournament fisherman, serious tournament fisherman. You didn't have one of our boats, you weren't in it. You just paid an entry fee. You were never getting into the winner's circle. It started from, the concept started from a John boat. A 16 by 48 riveted Monarch John boat that, I mean, there were maybe in the Keys, 6 or 8 of us had those things and used them all the time. I guided out of it every single day. And the things I did with it, the places that I took it, if I told you, you'd have me certified.
Well, that probably answers the second part of that question is, I know what your boat preference is now, but prior to your Hell's Bay, what was your favorite
I
boat?
was down to a John boat at that point. I had other skiffs. I had a company, and I was building a skiff called a Wind River skiff. I probably built 25 or 30 of them over about a 2 or 3 year period. And it was very similar to the Hell's Bay Whip Boat, very similar. One of these days I'll show you some of the pictures of the Wind River skiff and you go, wow. I mean, it was very similar.
Yeah. If I remember correct, I'm trying to think, I think I was in high school when y'all came out with the original Whip Ray. And I saw it at a fishing outdoor show in New Smyrna the first time I ever saw it. And it seemed, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like boat motor and trailer was like 15, somewhere right around in there.
I don't think it was that much.
Maybe 13 even.
Yeah, it was, which was a lot for the time, because it was 25 horsepower motor. But that boat probably honestly weighed 300 pounds.
I got to ride, I think it was hole number 2 or 3. That was my introduction to it. I got taken out by one of the later owners in that boat, and that's what sold me on it. Because I remember we launched at his house and ran across to a flat that I was familiar with. I'm fishing at the time, a 19-foot Sundance skiff. Rode just about like your John boat when there was ever a chop. And it was a summer afternoon. We had that little bit of post-thunderstorm chop on the water. But of course, like it normally does, it just slicked off right after that. And I remember he was poling that boat, and you could get so close to a redfish on the flat that all you needed was a kid's cane pole. I mean, it was amazing how silent, how shallow it would float. And, then when I bought mine, my first and only one, it was, talk about a shock on a true poling skiff.
Don't ever get rid of your boat.
I have been offered more for my boat than I paid for it. And everybody keeps asking me, why don't I get a new one? And I'm like, why? I have everything I want in this one.
And you
So,
keep the one you have.
but all right. So 16 years, 12 shows per year, plus a 13th that kind of overkept the entire year. That's a lot of different locations that you got to visit and a lot of different fish you got to target. Was there ever a location or a fish that you wanted to target or go to that you didn't get to? No?
No, I mean, we didn't do everything, but we did enough. I mean, we did enough. I mean, remember that we were doing this before anglers traveled. Today, that's all serious anglers do is travel. I mean, they have a wardrobe for travel, and then they have another wardrobe for the flats. And they have luggage designed for their travel. And they have conveyances for their rods and their plunder for travel. Nobody traveled. You fished around your house, or you went to the Keys or the Glades once a year. That was it for most, for most people. And the majority of fly fishers were Sweetwater guys. I mean, they were guys who fished Colorado and Montana and Wyoming and Idaho. I mean, they were interested in bonefish, but they were addicted to something else. It took a while to make that shift. But in the process of making that shift, that's where all this travel took place. I mean, that's where it all happened. I mean, we began to travel to make these films, to entertain people, and to take them away from their everyday fishing lives and experiences. And it was that about the show that made it so popular, along with the focus on the relationships, the focus on the experience, which was so different at the time than it is today. Today, you talk to your buddy who lives in Pennsylvania, and he's packing for the Seychelles. Nobody even knew how to spell Seychelles back then. Or Midway Island. I mean, I went to Midway Island. I fished there. It was amazing. I mean, I could tell you stories, things that happened at Midway that would astound you. And that happened in the times that nobody traveled. So, in spite of all those wonderful destinations, the destination that, and species of fish that were not available in your hometown, it was in fact my hometown and my home waters, which were the Everglades, where if I had to go somewhere or pick a spot that was my favorite spot, which is one of the questions that people always wonder about, it would have been the Everglades of the 90s and earlier, and the fish of the Everglades of the 90s. Before that world was degraded so much by so many different things. But the Everglades and the fishing in the Everglades was the best fly, light tackle fishing in the world. More species, prettier country, nicer fish's house. I mean, it was, and all protected and owned by the government. I mean, it was so special.
And that, you're right, that was one of the later questions, but that's okay. How about your favorite fish? If you have one, Everglades, favorite location, but
I love bonefish. I really love bonefish.
what is it about the bonefish that?
I love his house. I love his propensity to paddle up into very, very shallow water and do his thing. Tailing or finned out bonefish is, I mean, even more so than permit, because it's not as infrequent as permit. I mean, you have a good chance of seeing bonefish do this. And when they're in super shallow water like that, finning or tailing, the presentation is so critical. I mean, it demands so much of you as an angler. I love that about bonefish. I love that you're pursuing them in a skiff that somebody thought about and built and transported to some faraway destination, and it's being pulled around by, I mean, you just think about bone fishing in the Bahamas, for example, only because it doesn't exist in the United States anymore. I mean, South Florida used to be better than the Bahamas for bone fishing. But think about fishing in the Bahamas. I mean, you get up in the morning, you walk out to the end of the dock, and there's a skiff tied there, and there's a bonefish guide who's a local guy who probably, if he wasn't a bonefish guide, would be a commercial fisherman or a lobsterman, or would be working for someone doing something that was tedious as far as he was concerned. And I say that because if he had the stuff to be a bonefish guide in the first place, working for somebody else in some tedious job would be a death sentence for a person like that. If he had the stuff to be a bonefish guide in the first place. And a bonefish guide in the Bahamas is a jet pilot. You know, you stop to think about the jobs that a man can do in the Bahamas. Being a bonefish guide he's an astronaut. Not only is he an astronaut, but he gets to spend his days with people from faraway places. Well, they could be from Europe, they could be from Muslim countries, they could be from the United States, they could be brain surgeons, thoracic surgeons, they could be lawyers, doctors, astronauts, they could be anything. He gets to spend his days with them. And you know what? They admire him and his lifestyle. And they're only there for a week. And then they got to go back to being a surgeon. And he's there pulling the flats the next week with a lawyer from Pittsburgh or from Denmark. I mean, those guys, it's huge. And when you get to spend a day in the Bahamas fishing with one of those guys, I mean, his stories, the people that he's...
All right. I kind of discussed it a little bit earlier with you about Walker's Cay is the platinum show that all others are compared to. Like I said, even today, I know you still get a little shocked when you realize how much people still love the show today. But was there a time that you and the producers realized how special this show was? Or has it ever crossed your mind to realize how special the show was and how many people it has touched in a very positive way?
Well, yeah, I think what we realized, was, and I keep falling back on this relationship thing, there wasn't a single show that we did over a 16-year footprint of shows that didn't involve somebody that I had a relationship with. And I know we talked about relationships, but I always think that if you took a confessional and turned it over and laid it down lengthwise, it's about the size of a skiff. And if you turned it sideways, it's about the width of the cockpit of a game boat. And the skiff and the cockpit of a game boat wind up being confessionals in many ways. I mean, you share things with the people that you have these relationships with. In the course of a day, when you're not thinking about a mortgage payment, you're not thinking about a bank debt, you're not thinking about a responsibility to an employee or their families, all of that was left behind when you pushed away from the dock. And so you're in a very special place in this confessional, whether it's longitudinal or... So I think we realized from the very, very beginning that we had a hold of the beating heart of what people do when they go out on the water. Even when you go alone, because you're alone, you have the opportunity to think about these things in life that are so critically important, much more important than the mortgage payment, much further reaching than paying off the mortgage payment, or the car loan, or the truck loan, or whatever it is, the final payment on your kid's education, whatever it turns out to be. So I think we had a hold of that. Nobody else was focusing on that. It was just bass coming over the gunnel as fast as they could, being released, and the next cast is being made as the fish is falling out of the angler's hand. I mean, it was, is that fishing? Is that why we're there? Is that, no, it isn't. Let's tell that story. And so there were certain things at the time, that let us do that. Number one, there weren't a million shows. And so there wasn't a tremendous push for the few sponsorship dollars that were out there. There weren't 175 shows going after those dollars. It was just us. And the sponsors, because there were so few shows and so many sponsors, the sponsors didn't have the power that they have today. When you try to make a show today and there's 200 shows competing for that sponsor's dollars, he has tremendous power over the content of the show. And he can dictate to you what position his product has in your show. You can, and they do. And so the show takes on an infomercialistic feel that we didn't have to have back then. We were actually identified with the few sponsors. We had Dodge, Mercury, and Bass Pro and Walkers. And we were identified with those sponsors, and vice versa. They were identified with us. And they had no power to dictate content, where we went, what we filmed. And I remember back then, we were beginning to have email. And all I did when I wasn't actually filming or producing a show in the field was answering emails asking what was that line that what is that braid that what is the knot that you were tying the braid to the monophone? What was the push-pull that you were, I mean, it was just, because people didn't have the ability to stop the programming, blow the image up, look at the knot, look at the reel, look at the rod, look at the, I mean, it was a different world then, John. And as a producer of the show, I had incredible power and the ability to produce a lyrical show and focus on the things that were really important rather than trying to sell a sponsor's product. And the poor guys that are producing television today are encumbered by all of the wrong things. Not their fault. It's just the system is broken to the point where they have no choice. If they want to produce a show, they have to deal with all that stuff. That I know of today. There is not a single lyrical program out there. This interview format has invaded every single show that I'm aware of. They're all the same thing. They sit there and in an interview talk about the very things that the viewer has just seen or will see momentarily. Instead of just letting it happen, filming it lyrically and beautifully, they feel this need to sit and discuss it.
Well, that kind of leads us to one of the other questions somebody had about, and you've kind of answered it in that, but do you think, everything seems to kind of go cyclical in the world, do you think sponsors will ever realize that they could be much more successful viewership-wise producing another show like Walker's Cay Chronicles, where, I mean, 16 seasons, Flip. Tell me another show, and I mean, even sitcoms and stuff.
We were on the air longer than Seinfeld.
Yeah, nobody does. I mean, The Simpsons is the only one that comes to my mind, you know, but do you think they'll ever come to the understanding that if they produced a great show, bringing back that artistic relationship, focusing on what it's like to really go out and do, and I don't care if it's fishing or hunting or, you know, just going out shooting photographs in nature. Do you think they'll ever understand that if they went back and allowed it to be what it's really about, their viewership would increase, the longevity would increase, and I personally believe the sales of their product would increase, because you're reaching those people that really understand and want to be a part of it. You know, we were talking about earlier with the rum. It's a lifestyle. It's not Johnny come lately, you know, I'm going to take up fly fishing or I'm going to take up archery tomorrow and do it for a week. It's a lifestyle. Do you think they'll ever come back to realizing that? Or do you think it's gone?
I think that there may be a moment, not in television, but online, where it may happen. I think that there are some amazing sponsors, companies like Yeti, that are producing their own films, and they're doing it right. And they don't have, I mean, look at the Yeti films.
Mm-hmm.
They're not about Yeti. They're not infomercials. There's some really good films. And there are some film production companies today that do magnificent work. I mean, they're capable of doing so much better things than we ever could do. I mean, their equipment is better. They're younger, they're stronger, they're smarter. The world is accessible. My God, they have drones. They have gimbals. They have dollies. They have. I mean, it's incredible. And the equipment is this big. I mean, a film camera that we worked with weighed 70 pounds, and it was on somebody's shoulder all day. The sound equipment was huge, and it was tied around somebody's neck, and some poor sound recorderist had to tote that around to record sound all day. I mean, what can be done today, and what some of the really talented guys, I know some of them. They're unbelievably talented. I mean, I salute them. I mean, they're doing things that, I mean, I'm in awe of what they can do. The question is, how do they finance what they're capable of? And the time-buy television model is broken completely. You can't afford to buy the time on television and acquiesce to sponsors' demands and produce good television today. You just can't do it. And there are some TV hosts that miraculously produce good shows, entertaining shows. I don't have to name them. Discerning viewers know whose shows they are. But imagine what they could be if they didn't have to spend all that money on the time, and if they didn't have to spend all that time and energy dealing with what the sponsors think the show should contain. There could be some astounding productions out there. And so the internet may provide the platform for that, for a time before the sponsors figure out how to rule that. But I think that there will be a moment in time where much better shows than I was able to produce. The potential is there for it to be produced, and the people, my God, just the boats and motors and film equipment and tackle, and the ideas, just the intellect of the people who are doing it are much greater than, and that's the way it's supposed to be, incidentally. It's not something I'm jealous of. Oh my God, somebody's going to, no, that's the way it's supposed to be. At the same time, they will never be able to film the things that I film. They don't exist anymore.
Right.
They'll never be able to see the things that I've seen. They're not there. And it's just a shame that there wasn't a way to warp it around in a way that these guys today, with all their great ideas and equipment and everything, and the reason that they can't is that we were shit stewards of the natural world. My generation, and my dad's generation, and his dad's generation. And we didn't know what was going to become of, South Florida is the cradle of saltwater fly fishing. And look what it's become.
If there's one good part to this whole COVID debacle around the world, I've heard from some people in the Keys, from the Everglades, that fishing has been the best in the last few months that it has been in the last decade.
Well, my take on that is there will be cycles where the fishing rebounds to some extent, but the fishing will never be what it was. It'll never be what it should be. It'll never be what it could be, and it will never be, because the answer to all the problems is clean, sweet water. That's the answer.
And it's what we're all fighting
So
over.
where's it going to come from? Where is it going to come from? And if somebody can figure that out, there's a chance. But right now, all the solutions are Band-Aids. None of them deal with the problem. The problem is pollution.
Right.
The problem is, all the Everglades problems start 15 miles west of where we're sitting right now. And they make their way down through the Kissimmee chain of lakes into Lake Okeechobee and out the Miami River and the Caloosahatchee River, and it's just this clean water that's needed to fix the bottom of this state's problems, all of the state's problems. That water is not available. So we come up with all these ways to treat the terrible water. But the problem of pollution still exists. And the state grows at a rate that there's no way that we can continue to put Band-Aids on this problem.
Yeah, it's the proverbial trying to plug the leak in the dam with your finger and stop it.
So I want to always be at the head of the spear fighting. I don't mean to suggest that the battle end. I think we need to do everything that we can do and more. And until my dying breath, I will. But as I fight, I wonder,
Can we win? And we've had those long discussions on the skiff where I'm the same way. I saw Mosquito Lagoon at what was probably its prime when I first got here. It was just really being discovered. I know what it's like to go out and go into one basin and have 3,000 redfish in a basin. I know what it's like to go back to that same basin now, and if you see 2 redfish in there, it's a good day.
and if you see a single blade of grass.
And that's the really scary part to me, is even, I've got video 5 years ago where I had areas that still had beautiful grass. But you go back to those same areas today and it's the surface of the moon. It's nothing but mud.
The last time Diane and I took a skiff into the lagoon, which was 3 or 4 weeks ago, I actually saw a manatee out of the water completely beached, eating black mangrove leaves.
It's become a very common sight.
It was not for me. I saw that, and at first I thought it was a dead manatee.
Mm-hmm.
But this manatee was 6 or 8 feet from the water, eating black mangrove leaves and buttonwood leaves, because there's nothing else in the water for that animal to eat. And we've protected them until there are so many of them that you can't run a skiff anywhere without hitting one.
Yep.
it's just, I mean, we do all these things to ourselves.
And you know, that's what it comes down to. It's, you know, you say you were a bad steward, your father's generation, your grandfather's. I've got photos of my grandfather with these huge stringers of bass. You know, 20, 30 bass that they caught that day. They weren't doing it to be malicious. They weren't doing it
Well, we didn't know.
to destroy the world.
We did not know.
They didn't know. They had no idea. And I guess the thing that angers me today, we know better than to do that, and yet it's still happening.
But John, it's not the stringers of fish that are the problem. I mean, that's something that shouldn't be done. I mean, and to some of us it's unconscionable. That's not the problem today. The problem is the fish's house.
Right.
Not how many fish you keep out of that house, especially bass. I mean, they have a 12-month growing season in the state of Florida. It's about food and habitat, and that's really what we should be concentrating on. And all that leads you into the area of quality of life in the state of Florida going on into the future. It's not just about the shrimp in the eelgrass in the St. Johns River. It's about so much more than that 15, 20 years down the line. And that's what we've turned a blind eye towards. And there are very few of us who see that. And in my mind, going back 15 years is the problem of herbicides,
Right.
which I see as the biggest problem that we have in the state of Florida today. Beyond pollution, beyond anything else.
And I agree with you, because you and I have been out there when they've been spraying, quote unquote, you know, invasive species, and they're spraying everything. You know, they spray everything. They don't seem to care what they're killing or what they're hurting. Then I brought it up with one of my elected officials in Volusia County. They spray the ditches that lead straight into the lagoon.
John, if you read the statute, the Florida statute, that deals with invasive aquatic species, the mandate of the Freshwater Fish and Game Commission, who's mandated to carry out the program, is to eliminate invasive aquatic species. That's the mandate of the statute. There's nothing mentioned in the statute with regard to clean water. It's all about eliminating the invasive aquatic species.
And yet,
So in the process of eliminating them, they eliminate the possibility of clean water. So the solution becomes so much worse than the problem, just on the face of the statute that's on the books. And so, am I the only one that see this?
no.
Of course not.
And
Of course not. But the people who could fix it are political people. If you could wrap your claws or your mind around the number that represents what the state and municipalities and private industries as well spend on herbicides every year, the number would astound you. It would begin with a B.
And have several numbers in it.
And when there are that many dollars, they wind up going in directions that they should not. And it's those directions that ensure the perpetuation of the application of these herbicides and the concept that they must be eliminated. We're at the point right now where everything has been eliminated. We need the root systems and the filtration of these invasive aquatic species. We need them for our watersheds in the state of Florida to survive. But the mandate of the law is to eliminate them.
Well, I think it was Wayne DeFreeze, if you know Wayne.
Sure I do.
I'm sure, yes. Wayne put it best because I talked to him about some grass stuff going on up in my area. And he put it best to him. He said, when you have nothing left except barren ground, how is anything invasive?
Well, that's an interesting point.
And you know, his mention of it was because the north end of the Indian River is seeing a large growth of a particular callaripa grass that everybody is saying is invasive. And Wayne's thing is, there's nothing here. You can't have anything invasive if there's nothing here. Let it grow, and then what you think is the residential grasses will grow back. But we have to have something to help clean the water. And you know, because without some clean water, nothing grows. Nothing survives. Nothing lives. And then I remember I proposed a question to FWC. I said, you know, in the Everglades, they're all about killing off the invasive python. The python's killing everything. We know that's not true. Yes, the python's a problem.
I don't agree,
but it's
the problem to who?
It's a very small problem compared to what really is the issue. But we're all about killing the python because it's quote unquote invasive. Same thing with now different lizards down there. The same thing with all these invasive grasses that they want to kill. But we protect the manatee that's really an invasive species too. And I love manatees. Please don't take it the wrong way. I love manatees. But why do we pick and choose one to protect?
I don't know that the manatee is an invasive
others to
species.
kill?
I'm not sure that's... I remember when I was a kid, we had manatees. People ate them.
Right.
We had them. I'm not sure that they weren't always here in small numbers.
Just not as big as...
Yeah, but I mean, at this point, they've multiplied. I remember as a kid, you would see a manatee and talk about it for a month. A month. And then somebody killed one and my grandfather was carving it up. I mean, but it was a huge event. I mean, today, if you do not run over one,
it's a good day.
It's a good day.
Yes.
Or if you had 3 near misses, it's a good day. We've protected them into harm's way.
Yes. You never saw them back in the flats.
I saw one 3 days ago up in a braid, a tiny, tiny little braid of the St. Johns River. I saw 3 of them. John, I mean, I've been bareboating up in those braids for 50 years, and I have never seen a manatee, never. And now I saw 3.
Well, when I moved here, you'd see the occasional one in the river. And, you know, we lived on the river. They'd come up by the dock, and they'd eat some grass and go on their way. And it was always, oh man, we got to see a manatee. It was cool. You know, now I get people that come in and want to see a manatee because they've never seen one. And I'm like, how many do you want to see? I can show you 300 between here and the next cut back into the flats, you know. So
Yeah, and what little grass we can cause to grow in the Mosquito Lagoon system gets eaten by this herd of manatees that's out of control. It's just,
Well, I'll redirect you to something.
please.
You love the Everglades. We already talked. Was your favorite place to fish and target stuff. How about a favorite fly? There's some people that fish down there now. Do you have a favorite fly for there?
Oh, I don't know. Lefty invented a fly called a deceiver, which I'm sure many people are familiar with. And there came a time when I was fishing this time when I took the John boats way back into the glades, and I was fishing almost exclusively back there. And I modified Lefty's deceiver and into a pattern that, with his permission, I called a Glades deceiver. And it wasn't something that I took credit for necessarily. I mean, it was still Lefty's fly. I just changed it a little bit because we were fishing it in a way that the deceiver was not intended to be fished when Lefty developed it. And so with his blessing, when I explained all these things, I said, can we call it a Glades deceiver? And Lefty. So there is a fly called the Glades deceiver. And it has a certain weed guard that's very effective when you're casting all day against a mangrove shore. And the fly itself is much more aerodynamic and performs better with a shorter leader than the full-size deceiver does. And so that was the fly that, in the years that I exclusively fished the Everglades, I used that fly a lot. Drew Chacon has written a number of books on saltwater flies, and that fly is featured in a couple of his books. And so if anyone's interested in seeing that fly, it's available to be seen there.
And as a fly tyer, I can appreciate what you said about asking Lefty's permission. I remember my first published fly with Umpqua was one of Tim Borski's patterns that I modified. Just changed just a little bit. I wanted to do a little something different for up here, and never thought 2 seconds about it. I just changed it. I just used a little bit different material and changed a couple of things on it. But it was, in my view, it was still his fly. And Umpqua came up and wanted to buy the pattern and sell it. And I asked, first thing I did was email Tim and asked if I could do that. And I remember Tim was kind of dumbfounded. He's like, dude, that's your fly. No, it's not. It's your fly. Changed it a little bit, So I can appreciate that aspect.
No, I think you should respect the people who came up with things. I think at this point there are so many flies, so many tires, so many materials available. It's hard not to step on someone's toes when you come up with a fly. And I think that has been the evolution of tying. And so you got to get over it. When someone ties a fly that looks like your fly, they may think that they came up with that. And there's so many of them today, okay.
Right.
Let them come up with it.
Yeah.
In the total scheme of things.
You're right. It is very small, and especially when it's a change of materials with the 20,000 synthetics that are out there now.
Yeah. You have to get over that.
What was the longest time it took to film a single episode of Walker's Cay, if you can remember.
Yes. I can remember. It was a summertime Bahamas show that was plagued by rainstorms that were raining sideways. And it just wouldn't, and we had traveled to the Bahamas. We had 2 large game boats way down at San Salvador, and it just wouldn't quit raining. And we'd wake up in the morning, make coffee, and watch it rain sideways. And we tried, well, we'll do a thing on tying flies and what it means to get rained out for one day. And, oh, well, if you get rained out for 2 days, you can work on knots and you can re-spool your reels, and then it rains the 3rd day. And then, and so you, at this point, after 3 days, you have 3 days worth of investment of dollars into the show. So do you pull the plug on that and go, we really only want to spend 5 days filming this show? That leaves us only 2 days. It's still raining. Do we pull the plug and we had to buy diesel to get these boats back to the Keys from the Bahamas, from San Salvador. So the question becomes a financial one at some point. And then it becomes an emotional one, and it was just this particular show. I think we spent 6 or 8 days down there watching it rain before someone finally, the voice of reason prevailed, and somebody finally said, "Look, and we didn't have radar, we didn't have good reporting then. It was just like, God, it's raining again today."
Yeah, people nowadays wouldn't understand it because they pull up radar on their cell phone.
But the other part of it is that if we had today's equipment back then, we could have taken it out in the rain.
Right. Yeah, cameras weren't really.
It was a $200,000 camera and lens package
that you're not going to stick underwater without this big.
It wasn't waterproof. It wasn't water resistant. It wasn't. Today you can stick your telephone underwater and take pictures. Crazy. It's wonderful, but that was probably the longest one. And we had situations where we would go to a far-flung destination, and we would be there for a month, and we would film several shows. And so that was always good. But the longest individual attempt was that one at San Sal.
Okay.
I think there was a Club Med there, and we wound up taking refuge in Club Med for...
Let's see, 16 years, 12 episodes. I'm not going to try to do the math in my head after a couple of cups of rum here. Do you have a favorite?
Boy, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. My mind goes back through the shows like a pinball table, bouncing off of one and focusing on the next and bouncing off again, and I look at them and go, oh no, that's my favorite. Oh, the one with Lefty. No, the one with Diane. There were so many. And because it all wasn't catching a fish, it would be impossible for me to pick. And I think that's the right answer.
I think it is too, because, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head as far as what it meant, because, when I have flashbacks to those times I got to spend with Lefty, the shows he did with Lefty were my favorite. And then I think about, man, I wish I'd gotten to fish with Jose, and I think about those shows, and it's like, man, those were really good too.
No, I have the same thoughts. I look
You know.
back at those people, and then I go, yeah, those ones with Lefty were so special because of what he meant to me. And Jose, the same thing. And then I go, well, you know what? I did a couple of shows with John Havlicek, and one of them, he almost got eaten by a crocodile. And I think back, God, maybe that was the best show. And then, I think of one with Dick Butkus in Costa Rica, and I can't.
And then you're probably like me, where it's like, I have a lot of people I love to fish with, but my favorite is still my wife. When I get to spend that very intimate time with her, and it's like, this may be a very difficult question to answer, because I don't think anybody is going to think about everything that went into producing a television show back then compared to today's technology. But how long do you think it took to produce a show, filming, editing, production-wise? or and if you can't come up with an hour, just what did it take to do it back then?
No, I couldn't tell you the hours, but I mean, just to put it in perspective, we filmed it all on film.
Not digital. I mean, this is
Film.
This is not even VHF type tape or
Film.
VHS. Yeah.
A roll of film this big ran through the camera. And when it ran through the camera and ran out, you had to stop. You had to take that roll of film out of the camera, but it had to be done in a black bag so that it didn't get exposed, and rewound by hand into a tin box, and then closed up in the box, and then tape wrapped around the edge of the box to seal the light out. All of this was done in the black bag. And then a new magazine for the camera had to be loaded inside that bag with fresh film, and then taken out of the bag and mounted on the camera, and then you could resume filming.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the black bags because I'm still familiar with 35 millimeter camera. The old days of cameras with 35 millimeter film,
Well, it was
processing it,
certainly
a
laborious process.
And I can only imagine. I did that stuff in a controlled classroom, back in high school days. I can only imagine trying to do this black bag by feel on a bouncing boat.
You had to do it all the time.
That's insane when you think about it.
But that wasn't the worst. The worst was that you had to get it back into America through customs. And customs didn't take your word. Customs in Nicaragua, they didn't. Oh, what's in the bag? Oh, film. Exposed film. Let's see it. Well, you can't see it. It's exposed film. You can't see it. Well, we have to see it. And then the argument begins. And we have permission from the consulate to bring it back in the country. Well, how do we know this is the film? I mean, and it was a goat roping every time we came back into the United States with exposed film.
Well, and you're talking about a time period, too, when drug trafficking was...
It was very difficult.
Yeah.
And then that film had to be mailed to New York City, where the editing process began. And so it wasn't just like today where you buy an app and your digital program is edited by clicks or taps or dragging something here and there. This film had to be copied to a beta master tape, which was more tape like film. And that ensured that the original exposed film was protected. And all the editing was done on this beta master tape. And so there was a loss of image quality between the exposed film and the beta master. It wasn't a great deal. It still had the warm look and feel of film, but you were able to edit the tape much easier than you were the film. It was almost impossible. You'd have to cut the film, splice it, tape it back together, all those things. No, it was much easier to do. You had to do the same thing on the beta master, but it was easier to do than on the film. So then that was being done in New York City by an editor who was one of the most incredible editing talents that I've ever known. He was insane. I mean, he could keep the storyline in his head. He could make all the cuts and fades, and he was gifted beyond belief. He did not know a cormorant from a bald eagle. He was a New York, New Jersey guy. He knew the streets, and he knew editing. And so, very often, there would be honest errors involving the natural flow of the natural world, because he didn't have those touchstones to be able to make that edit. And so he would send me rough edits in the mail on rough tapes, and I would plug those tapes into a machine, into a monitor, and I would look at the tapes, and there would be a cormorant flying along, and then in the next scene the cormorant was a bald eagle or a wood duck, or, and so I would have to send the tape back with comments, and the tape had time code on it, so that as you saw the images, there was a time code on the bottom so you could make reference to the point where the eagle turned into a wood duck or into a coyote. And I would send the tape back, Angelo, at 1 minute, 32 seconds, point 14, whatever, there's a coyote that should really be a cormorant. And so he would, okay, and he would change it and make it. And so that process took time. I mean, it was tape going back and forth in the mail until we finally, and there were endless conversations between he and I where I would have to explain to him what was happening on the boat and what was important. And he'd get it. I mean, he would get it and remember it and feel it in his heart, and it would come out in the edit. I mean, he was the best.
He just had to be told, though.
But he had to be, because he wasn't there.
Yeah.
And he had never been there. And it wasn't like one of the cameramen today, one of the videographers today, that's there on the scene shooting, goes back somewhere to a computer and edits the show. He was there. He knows that the sailfish jumped off eventually, and that he has to build up to that with footage that he remembers. Oh, well, we had a couple of shots of John's face while the fish was running and jumping, and let me cut the face into... I mean, he didn't have the benefit of any of that. He was never on the set, ever, in 16 years.
I cannot imagine trying to edit a show that I wasn't there for.
He was so amazingly gifted.
I mean, it must be that is a talent.
He was incredible.
That you probably wouldn't find anymore.
He was incredible. He was incredible, and he didn't know what a skiff felt like. I mean, he didn't know what the timing. I mean, but he got it. I mean, he was amazing.
Well, the final question, out of all those shows, what's the most memorable part of shooting all those shows?
The most memorable part of shooting? I'm not sure.
The most memorable experience in all the shooting of those shows. Is there one part of all those shows that really jumps out at you?
I guess there was a really amazing moment when Dozer was landing a tarpon, and he leaned over the cover board to grab the fish's gills at the instant that the fish decided to jump. And the fish jumped into his face, broke his nose. I mean, seriously broke his nose. And it was all caught on camera, and he was an amazing samurai. I mean, he finished the show, finished the scene, finished the whole thing with a broken nose, and you could see that it was broken. And it wasn't just, it might be broken. It was
the old crooked, completely crooked sideways break.
Yeah. He was busted. But samurai that he is, finished the deal. I remember that. That's the first thing that jumps out. But there are so many things. I mean, there were plane rides.
We talked about one you took, the longest plane ride in the
and
world.
There were short, very frightening ones, and very, very long, endless ones involving drugs. There were so many moments.
Let's clarify that, not drugs that you were taking, but
pharmaceuticals, let's put it that way. And I mean, just imagine over the course of 16 years, but I have to say this, because this is in my heart. For the last, for the whole time, the people involved in producing the show were very few. And they were incredibly talented. And I came to that family with no skills at all other than, I was a fisherman. I ate it, I slept it, I dreamt it. I was a fisherman. And so it was their combined talents as filmmakers and producers of programming, and it just happened that documentaries were their bag, and they were able to bring all the talents from that documentary world to the outdoor television world, which was an amazing ingredient to be able to bring. And so they brought what they brought, and that was, in combination, the ability to make it into a production and to deliver visually and audibly a message. And I brought something else to the thing, but it never could have happened without these 3 or 4 guys. I mean, they were, and the cast changed a little bit, but for most of the time, it was a guy named Bob Hanna and a guy named Rick Patterson who, they were magical, incredible talents, both of them. And Bob was the cameraman. But he was not only able to film what needed to be filmed, but he knew what else had to be filmed to form the glue to put all of that together. And Rick Patterson, who recorded all the sound, he had an amazing ability to see the finished product and to bring bits and pieces into the production process that could have come from nowhere else. And so, it was never my show. It was a collaboration. I could never, and Jose could never have done what he did by himself. And none of the notorious hosts could have done what was done, good or bad, without some people who really were incredibly talented, and I was the luckiest of all.
Well, I hope y'all realize how far-reaching the show still is, and how many people it has brought, not only to the light tackle fly fishing realm, but to the outdoor world itself. Like I said, I find it pretty amazing that you have a show that kids weren't even alive when it was filmed.
Yeah.
And they are die-hard, hardcore fans of it. And I would hope that that would help you and everybody involved realize how special it is.
Well, we're all grateful that we could have come along at a time where we were able to make that sort of a contribution. It was an exceptional time, and it was a time early on in the lifestyle that's now come and gone. And the water's not there, the sky's not there, some of the islands aren't there, and so we were just lucky. And you can't do anything without a little bit of luck.
It does take some of that,
Yeah.
And I feel fortunate in my path in life. I know I've told you before, but I feel like I need to tell you again. As a 15-year-old kid who had been poling the flats since he was 9, when I moved down here and got my first boat, I remember a rainy Saturday morning, and it was before Walker's Cay, it was your show prior to that. On a rainy Saturday morning when I was complaining I couldn't go fishing to my grandfather, that I came across a show you were filming up here catching redfish on fly, and it was just prior to my 15th birthday, and I was watching it and I was awestruck. I was catching redfish on bait casters, left and right. It was what I did, and my grandfather passed by and saw me watching it, and I made the comment. I said, that's what I want to do. That's my next step. I want to fly fish. I want to catch a redfish on fly. And he took me that day, him and my grandmother took me down to the fly fisherman in Titusville, to Frank and Liz's place, bought me a fly rod kit, the same store that I wound up
Managing
20 years later managing.
Incredible.
And then I remember the first day you walked through that door, and I asked you to go fishing, and your response was, well, I can't go till tomorrow.
Did we go?
We did. And I'll never forget our first fishing trip. Thank God there have been many more, because I got to redeem myself. When we were on a flat with potholes and big trout laying in all the potholes. and you had already caught a couple of fish and told me you wanted to pole me. And I have never been so nervous in my fishing career than to have you poling me to these monster sea trout laid up, and I'm making cast after cast after cast, and they won't eat, they won't eat, they won't eat. And then I'm stripping by one of them, and it eats. And I do nothing. I don't set the hook. I'm just dumbfounded that this trout finally ate after like the 20th cast. And I remember from the back of the platform, all I hear is, "That one wasn't big enough for you?" And everything you have taught me since then about being a fishing guide, about putting stories together, whether it's writing, whether it's doing a film, the opportunities you have given me and people like me, introductions that I probably would have never made any other way in the industry. Thank you. It means a lot.
We all need to say thank you to somebody. I could say everything that you just said, I could say about Lefty or say about Stu or people who gave me the same sorts of... And so all we can do is pay it forward, and we'll do that. And eventually, those are the things that will be judged by. It's not going to be how far we could cast or how big the tarpon is. It won't be that. It'll be how much we paid for it.
I agree. 100%, my friend. Thank you. Thank you for taking this time.
My great pleasure.
You have a lot more fans than I think you realize. And we appreciate your time.